Hi, Dan.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
Good.
Sorry, I kind of bailed on the last group. My travel plans in June, July just crowded out everything.
It has been a crazy summer, just not at all what I expected.
You're teaching summer school, aren't you?
Yeah, I finished summer school, and then yesterday I drove 10 hours to southern Minnesota to pick up my son. He was at Carleton studying neuroscience at a summer program for 3 weeks. And and then yeah, so that was 5 hours down. We spent a couple hours there. He did his poster session, and then we had lunch, and then we brought him back. And then yeah, and then 5 hours back. He's decompressing from the experience. It's kind of jarring to be with people, in that kind of intense situation for 3 weeks, and then to be cut off. Yeah, but I've it's crazy today. Today I've been out to hitched up the trailer to the truck, went down to the fleet store, picked up my mower that was getting repaired, brought it back, mowed a little because the place where I store the trailer was overgrown, to just prove to myself that the blade was working now and all of that, and put away the trailer, and yeah, just got to get everything ready. We have a girl coming to stay at the house, take care of all the animals while we're away at my daughter's wedding. So that's coming up. We're leaving Tuesday, so we got to get everything sort of prepared and situated so that she doesn't have a hard time while she's here. So
Yeah, busy summer.
busy
Yeah, mine
summer.
started with visiting my grandkids in New Jersey. My oldest is graduating high school.
Hmm.
Then I visited my daughter in Indiana. But then I did a week-long group tour down the Mississippi Valley, visiting all of the sites of indigenous tribes.
Wow.
And I was really surprised how old they were.
Yeah.
There's a mound on the campus of LSU that dates 6,000 years,
Wow.
right there on the campus.
Yeah.
And students were sliding down the mound for graduation activities. They
Oh,
fenced it
like
off.
on trays or on cafeteria trays or something. Yeah, nice. That's beautiful. Yeah, I suppose. There's that whole Mississippian thing, which we tend to think of as being, as sort of peaking around 1200 to 1500, but yeah, they must have come from somewhere. Yeah, and Poverty Point down in Louisiana is supposed to be super old.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cahokia there in
Yep.
St. Louis.
Yep.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
And of course, it extends way north
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of funny because that was I found that interesting in Tim, it says you're connected to audio now. Uh,
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I can hear you now. Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I was just, you're on the laptop for the first red square,
Ah,
and the sound is coming through the phone.
okay. Well, whatever works.
Perhaps whatever works. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of interesting because there are a lot of things that I hadn't realized about that. I guess what I was going to say, John, was that Graeber and Wengrow seem to suggest that it was that culture, even though it ended, sort of ramified, and maybe even influenced the ideas of the Wendat and the folks who were resisting any type of hierarchy because of some type of a reaction over time to that. Hey, Justin. Hey, Chris. It's interesting though that I'm using I don't know if I've mentioned, I'm using like almost entirely primary sources in my U.S. history US 1 course this fall, and one of them is the story of DeSoto bopping around in from 1593 to 1539 to 1542, and then dying of the fever in somewhere in Louisiana, right? And apparently infecting everybody everywhere he went, because the whole region, he says, is heavily populated. And then, when LaSalle comes down in the 1670s, it's empty. He floats down the Mississippi and he sees like nobody for hundreds of miles. So so really kind of interesting indication of all of this stuff that happens behind the scenes, and nobody knows, or at least nobody recorded that. I got a group email message, the weekly email from Eleanor today, and she says there's Obsidian merch, so I might buy an Obsidian logo T-shirt. I don't know.
But I think we're going to be talking about your book, but the idea of making notes and then visiting these places where civilizations did not have a written language is like the antithesis. So why wasn't there an urge to develop a written language? Some did, of course. The Inca had something, right, with the Quipu.
Apparently,
the Mayans had a much more extensive written language. It's just fascinating what motivates the written language.
Yeah.
Obviously, they got along quite well without it.
Right.
Well, we've touched on it a couple of times, but in a broad sense, most of Western society doesn't understand or know the power of what memory and orality really are in a culture, because we are so heavily dependent on literacy. But it's, once you dig into it and you figure out what's going on and how they were doing and remembering everything they remembered, it all makes way more sense. And it actually even can make your life as a Western uber literate person a little better along the way, I think.
You're talking about like the techniques the Greeks had about visiting different places to spark different kinds of memory, sort of physical mnemonic.
So that touches on it and starts to get at it. But I think what happened ultimately is, and there's the myth that, or story that Simonides of Chios stumbled upon this idea because of a building falling in on people, and he kind of recreated the idea of the method of loci, or the memory palace, which is how we know it in Western culture.
Yeah.
There are methods above and beyond that go way farther. So my working presumption right now is those methods existed in the ancient Near East. They broadly were lost to civilized culture, and then pieces of them got brought back and kind of reinstituted in the ancient Greeks. But those types of methods go way much further and much farther beyond just that as an idea. But that at least touches on, if you know what those are, that at least touches on some of what's happening.
Yeah. Well, and even without that, or adjacent to that, or or different for that, maybe, that whole tradition of epic narrative, right, kind of solidifies those things. Oh, Torin, you made it. Hi.
One of the other issues too is, in most of those oral cultures, and even still today, the societies that practice them, the information you learn within them and how you're introduced to them is slowly and gradually, as you become a member of the tribe or the group that's practicing it. So let's say you're Europeans coming to America the first time, and you meet the indigenous peoples, they're not of your tribe. So the amount of exposure you're going to get to that piece of their culture is only going to go to the level of maybe a kindergarten, first grade level. And as a result, the dumb Europeans not knowing better don't realize, oh, they don't know that much more because we can't see it. It's not written down.
Right.
And then they totally dismiss the culture. And that just only makes things worse. But it's, to me, that's probably one of the biggest tragedies of Western culture was that clash and not seeing the knowledge and value that the indigenous peoples they were meeting had.
Right.
So
yeah, I think that certainly there's that whole idea of initiation, right? That not only would you not share it with even people in your tribe who were not, hadn't attained that level, but certainly not with strangers who are, kind of aggressive and, not necessarily people that you want to welcome as literacy a disease.
And it's even underlined too by the fact that the story of the Pilgrims, or even John Smith, we can't even manage to last a year with all of our technology in this new world, and yet here are these people ostensibly without tools or guns or steel, it's nothing but a thing,
right, who are crushing it. And the Jamestown, the original Jamestown crew nobody had any interest in, doing any work. So that was part of their issue as well. But which sort of leads us to the question. Now, does Sweetgrass kind of talk about that? Because we were talking about what we're going to do after we take a few weeks off, if we begin again in September. And I didn't, I apologize, I have not had a chance really to kind of compile. I said I would compile all of those suggestions and put them in a list, and people would think about them and kind of suggest other ones and vote or whatever. And I haven't done that yet because it's been kind of a crazy week. Went down to southern Minnesota on Sunday, and then went back down again yesterday, 5 hours each way, to pick up my son, who finished his neuroscience thing that he was doing down at Carleton, and saw his poster presentation, and then brought him home, and he's sort of decompressing. I don't know that he's up yet, but he's back in the quiet North country, and I'm not sure that he's going to love that, but it is what it is. I'm thinking, I was thinking late August, maybe like take a good 3 weeks off, maybe four, and kind of resume right at the end of August, beginning of September, and kind of roll into the fall with something. And we did talk a little bit about doing a comparison, doing a synoptic thing. I was, and Chris, you mentioned you mentioned Sandtalk and Land. I had not heard of Sandtalk. I have heard of Land. It might be fun to do. Oh yes, and happy Islamic New Year today. Was it at sunset yesterday? I think it was. Sunset today. Okay. So if we were gonna do something comparative, it might be fun to
sunset yesterday, because that's when the day starts.
Right.
It's not midnight to midnight, sunrise to sunset. Sunset to sunset.
That's in the Old Testament, right? In the evening.
Any minute now.
And the evening and the morning was the first day. Yeah.
Yeah, any minute now it's going to be Sunday here.
Mm-hmm.
Equivalent.
Mm.
So this is what one I suggested.
Oh, right. Yes, you did. Yep, Mary Wollstonecraft.
It's to carry on with the I forgot the word. The equality theme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the other one, of course, was building a second brain.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and do we want to do a whole thing on building a second brain, or do we want to do a one, kind of one meeting, get through the, kind of get through our, okay, Pat's voting for one, Justin's one.
Or we could do one for each of the code for. So
code, all these crazy acronyms. We need more acronyms.
Just joking.
No, we definitely need more acronyms. So I tried to do one without acronyms. Although I did make up new names for things, which I was a little bit nervous about that, but I thought, oh, what the hell? Parents can do it, I can do it.
Everybody else has made up a new name. Why not me?
Yeah. I do think of, it's kind of weird too, because I all of my cards kind of, when they get in the box, they all run together, so I've got, and it takes them a while to get down to the other end of the room on the box, but these ones actually are facts, so it's kind of weird. I don't know that I'm actually even
on point notes. I'm curious if you've been calling them that for a while, or if you named them that in the book and are now using that as the word you use.
I've been thinking of them that way. I don't know that I've been calling them that, but I have been thinking of them that way because permanent notes wasn't really working for me as an idea. And evergreen notes, I think you asked, somewhere along the way I responded. Oh, I think it was I responded to something you said in the Aaron's 1981 translation, and it was about whether my, I don't know, somewhere along the way you asked it, you asked, is my thing sort of evolutionary like Andy Matuszak's, and I'm thinking of it not as being that, because I want to think of this as a conversation, and again, not to be a Luhmann purist or anything, like Scott is a little bit, I think, although he would deny it. But I think that there's some value in that idea of a conversation, even if it's a conversation with myself, in this note system, right? So that I don't want to erase the thing that came before. I want to modify it with an additional thought that would be on its own kind of additional note. So I think that is not really the same. I think that I don't know, I didn't read Andy that closely, but the sense that I got from him, and also kind of from Eleanor, was that that they were sort of constantly sort of refining their ideas in that note, right? And the note becomes better and better and better as time goes on. But that also, as a historian, I'd like to see the change.
Well, the one thing too, I like the way you frame it as a point note being that it should make a point was good, but you mentioned that a chapter or two after you've defined what it is roughly, and you may want to take that one sentence that it's something that should make a point and put that earlier in the definition when you introduce it. And that, I think, because that frames it well, particularly for the aspect of I'm using this for writing, but it also gives you the mnemonic of every time I see point note, that will now be stuck in one's head. That should make a point, and that's the definition of what it is, which will make it easier to use. It's one of those issues I had with all the four-letter acronyms Tiago Forte uses, is almost every time I had to go back and look up what does the particular letter mean.
Right.
And there's nothing necessarily that makes it easy to remember. And there were a few times, a few of the new words he uses that I have to define this new thing, which isn't really a new thing. He could have given it another name or the more common name. and I was irked that I had to go actively look back. And that just made me want to not use them all the more.
Yeah, well, that idea that they were being kind of, jimmied into place, right? Oh, I'm going to pick a word. Now I need a word, that begins with D that, to stick in this, in this spot. And there are a bunch of synonyms, I'll look at my, my thesaurus and find the one that, that begins with D. I mean, it's
the one good thing I always liked about Evergreen Note was it has a connotation of, I'm going to use this again, which depending on your area, there are thousands of notes I may never rewrite or revise.
Right.
And I'm sure I never will. But in a handful of areas where I'm doing active work, that's more likely the case. And I know I'm more likely to reuse it, use it or reuse it at some point in the future. So it's worth doing that work.
So so when you do that, do you go back and kind of rework if it's in Obsidian or someplace, do you go back and kind of edit it and, and sort of remove the stuff that no longer applies, add the stuff that does?
Usually I'll end up adding material, but it ends up being, it's part of that conversational process. It's material that gets added to it that adds or extends to the original idea. And so invariably then I excerpt that chunk out and put it just behind the card or link it to the original card. Okay. So a lot of that change actually ends up going somewhere else.
Yeah. Okay. So that's similar to sort of the way I was thinking of the conversation continuing. John.
Just a quick question. Did you mark your cards as source notes or point notes, or was that just obvious to you?
It was not, I didn't mark them, and it wasn't completely obvious to me. And I think that I think that I'm still sort of becoming more familiar with this process, and I think that I was speaking for myself. I think when I said that over time your source notes will become more evidency, and your point notes will become more argumentative, or or kind of making positive claims. And I think that I'm still in a process of kind of moving towards that. I'm not. Honestly, I'm not that committed to knowing which is which. I do think that there are, I think that there are different types of output. I mean, to stay focused on the output, I think that there are different types of output where sometimes, what you're looking for is a series of evidentiary statements, which will then sort of obviously lead to a conclusion. Right, or to some type of an inference at least. Other times, there's a whole lot more kind of conceptual argument going on, and maybe I was going to say, maybe those are the places where there's more nuance. I'm not sure that there's not nuance. There can't be nuance in a series of of facts. As I've been doing it, as I've been putting stuff in. And maybe I'll just share see if I can just share a thing for a minute. So I've been making, can you see this, this brain thing that I've got here? Okay, so I've been making, I have not actually, Pat, I have not put a lot of stuff in it yet. But what I have been doing is I've been making this list. This is my list of primary sources for the survey course. And so what I've been doing is I've been sort of putting them all in. There are and I'm not 100% sure whether I want to use this as a place where I keep the actual information or not, whether I want it to be a place where I sort of keep an index, and that will determine, I guess, probably whether I buy the big package or not. So that's what I've gotten to the point of. But those things, the way this actually works is that they end up looking like, the numbers end up being based on these things. So so my number for that would be, that, and actually if I go back even further, so I've got history is 1, North America is 4, so that's 1, 4. And then, American primary sources is 2, Confederation period, and then I'll number, once I actually put these things in, I'll actually number them. I think I've started doing that in the earlier ones. Yeah, these are the ones that I've actually processed, that I actually have got a page, basically, that's an output page ready to, to go into this reader that I'm creating for students. So these are the ones that I'm still editing. So yeah, I mean, so that would be, but that's kind of a data point, right? But it has its own, it has its own place in the, and it exists in the box, and it exists here. And this is sort of my map of the box, actually, I guess, when it comes right down to it, because really that's, I mean, all I did was I just said, okay, these are my top levels, right? So I got history, science, knowledge work, and human behavior right now. There are other things as they come up, I'll add, but those are the things that I've kind of added in so far. So
I'm curious, Dan, does the brain give you the ability to differentiate where on the screen things sit with respect to other things? And I say this because I'm so used to watching Jerry Mikulski use his brain, and he has usually the main ideas in the center, and then things that are linked to it and related below it are below it. And then he'll have things both to the left and to the right that indicate other relationships.
Right. There's a view thing that gives you a chance to change it. I think that he uses this normal view, right? So this is the parent, and these are the brothers and sisters, right? And this,
yeah. Okay.
This is the idea, and then these are the children.
So it's a resettable. Okay.
It's a resettable thing. You can't actually drag stuff around, but then you can press that plus button, and it will give you, like one layer down into your children of the children, so the grandchildren.
I have started playing with it, but haven't quite cracked it yet. But I know Zolt has been using the brain, I think, for 10 years, but prefers Obsidian now. And so he has a thing called Excalibrain built on Excalidraw. That essentially is trying to mimic or mirror some of these relationships and setups for Obsidian. Because I having watched Jerry use the brain for a long time, I can see the huge value in making those links way more easily, and it's really awesome. But it doesn't give you that, like, he's not using the text field for the notes the same way we all might.
Right.
Isn't to say,
and I'm not using it at all yet, and I still do have notes in Obsidian. One thing that I actually, and the thing that I like about Obsidian is I still like double bracketing things, and I still like kind of creating those wiki-esque kind of links inside of the body of a text, because I've been, as I've been talking about in the last couple of weeks, I've been sort of obsessing about output, and and even something like Eastgate's what was it called, the Storyscape, right, was the output for the most part was still a landing place, a block of text, and and then an outgoing area, which might have a couple of choices on it, like choose your adventure kind of thing, but it still seemed like, okay, this is really still very linear with a few branches, right? And so it's not, it's not a web yet, but the double brackets in the middle of, the block of text do allow you to, kind of go somewhere else, do allow you to sort of collect, the time, all of the times that you've mentioned a particular thing, like, the Great Pyramid or something like that in your, in your world history, or the Great Wall or something. And then, so ideally that would be kind of cool. I haven't looked at Prezi. I've heard of it, but I haven't. I haven't looked at that. Thanks. I'll take another look at that, Tim. What I would, what I have just discovered that I haven't really explored yet is the graph view of the node itself. Right, where you're in the thing and you go to the, the dot at the top right, and you can go down and you can do a open local graph, right? And then you can do, when you open the local graph, you can do, sort of 1 degree of separation, 2 degrees of separation, as long as you don't have a changelog in there, because that blows everything up. But if you don't have a changelog, then you can kind of see sort of how these things ramify a little bit. And so I'm thinking that might be, kind of a helpful tool as well. Okay, so Pat. Yeah. Do you think it is important? I was unsure about that. We'll get to you in a sec, Tim. I was unsure about that. Pat asked something about in the chat about me explaining, sort of the way that I'm doing the numbers. Is that too much? Am I leaning too much into my process if I do that? Because I don't. Again, it's not carved in stone. What's the history? Yeah, what is the historical origin? What's the etymology of ramify?
I'm not 100% certain, but I presume it comes from Petrus Ramus, who was a European scholar in the late 1500s who helped create a chunk of the Western break between oral traditions and the method of loci and a new educational setting that relied on outlines and structures of how things relate to each other. Is what I'm supposing.
I'll look into that, because that would make an interesting little.
And it really, he was an educational reformer who kind of died a weird death, but he heavily influenced a shift in the late 1580s, I think, in our educational systems as a Protestant in particular.
Okay, cool.
And literally
Tim.
got rid of all that other stuff.
Interesting. I'll look that up. Tim, what did?
Yeah, if you try the Prezi thing, we've mentioned in these talks a number of instances of a piece of content is a path through the forest, touching some of the trees.
Right.
Prezi is very much like that, but actually allows you to have a split, such that at some point, depending on the audience reaction or depending on the weight you want to put on it, you go left.
Oh, cool. So you're kind of like you're sort of like DJing your presentation.
So you can get to the same conclusion screen. I beg not to use the word slide or folios or acetate sheets, which is very PowerPoint. But it has to have a start and it has to have a finish. I think it's a finish as opposed to a multiple, but it might be multiple. But you don't have to go, when you perform the presentation, you don't have to go one way. You can twist it, because it's pretends to be a bit like a Catherine wheel or a circular twist. So they don't go much on how you blend from one slide to the next. It just twists and goes to another one. It might not be the next one, as in 18 following 17, but it might be 17 back to 14, or it might be 17 to 34. And it allows you to do that walk. How? I've never used it for a big one. I've only ever used it for like a 10 screen intro type one, because it doesn't come over PowerPoint, because it's so different PowerPoint. It doesn't make people react in the same way as it's, oh no, not another PowerPoint type. You know, and they're all sitting there wondering how many bullet points can you squeeze on a screen.
Right.
So
yes.
people have come up with really big ones, but it's almost as though if you're getting that sort of size, you're going to want us. You've got no obvious, easy way of actually saying, "Oh, now let's go back to chapter 10, roll it all the way back 3/4 of an hour, and then take a different path." Which I don't think you would find it that easily. It would be too like the brain to a certain extent. You can get very lost very quickly. Although I think the brain's great for helping with outlines, the visual graphs, and not forgetting I'm an engineer, but so first thing I do is do a mind map or a system sketch to show this is the flow, this is where the inputs are, this is where the outputs are, this is where the control comes from. All those usual things you see on sort of electrical diagrams and air conditioning diagrams. That's my bread and butter. And I see things like the brain, or just as important. You know, I've got 2,000 coloured dots on my obsidian graph. And I go, yeah, and I've got 97,000 letters. What the heck? You know?
Right.
So it's that if the diagram doesn't actually give you anything that you don't otherwise get from a proper hierarchical outline that you get in the brain to some extent, although it just graphicizes it a bit, or you could do it in Excel and have the sections expand and contract such that you only have the top layer and the one you're talking about at the time. You know? And you can get, and with automatic things like that, you can even get Excel to color code it as you go through.
I suppose, yeah.
So why do I want to? I mean, I've yet to see an obsidian graph, stroke roam graph that actually really told me anything. Once they get past like 50 or 100 dots, they look nice. Yes, I don't disagree. You know, but I'm saying, okay, I could go look at some fungal color slides in the bio lab or something. But you know,
yeah. I think that the thing for me about the obsidian graph was that, you know, you touch it. I mean, you can hover over things, and it'll show you that, you know, what the node is and what it's connected to. But then you can't sort of explore that, right? You touch anything else, and boom, you've gone there, right? Or you've opened up another page, and so
there's no paintbrush control. If you touch one thing, it reforms as though it's an oil spill on the surface of water, which is what it looks like in some respects. And that's where I think if it's a small enough number and you can see all, and there's just about readable title on all the dots, So you grab Zettelkasten as a word and pull it and see what it's connected to. Yes, then yes, I agree. It's a useful what's attached to this rather than read a list of tags or the links. But as soon as it gets to the set, you can't actually read something, and you pull something. Oh, that's an interesting one. What's that one? And you move the mouse, and it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
You can touch the one you're pulling, but you can't see what you're tugging.
Right. Well, and that's one of the reasons that I like the again, that's another reason I like the physicality of the notes, right? Is that I can because for me too, the whole sort of following, going down the rabbit hole and and finding myself someplace that when the whatever it is, the feeding frenzy ends of following links, right? And it's like, oh my God, how did I get here? I would like to be able to have that. I'd like to be able to have a way of of seeing how those things were related to each other, because I do think that's relevant a lot of times, if not just sort of interesting and fun for me. So I want to do it, and I do kind of believe in doing that. Thanks a lot. Thanks very much, Justin, for doing that. I thought that's what you were doing. You got the big book out and everything. That's very cool. I think I think the thing, it was I wanted to put something down. I wanted to be able to hit the publish button. Although I realized that I don't, that I have not, kind of completely cracked this code. I don't have I don't have the final answer even for myself, and I don't know that I ever really will. So I guess that was not, I had to sort of convince myself that was not something I was waiting for, for that to happen until I went ahead and wrote something down. So I think, and I think from that perspective, maybe it is, to be honest, kind of like Aaron's, although maybe not so much like Tiago, because he seems to sort of have decided what he's doing, and it'll be interesting to see what Scott publishes when his thing finally comes out, because I think he's got a fairly specific idea that that maybe isn't going to change.
Especially with how thick some of his sections appear to be. From about it.
Well, the drawer full of cards it does sort of give one pause, doesn't it? I can tell you that this project, was not a drawer full of cards. It was, it was a pack of cards about that thick, about an inch of cards. It actually, it began. It was numbered the way it was. I mean, and that was entirely kind of random, I guess. I mean, 3 is my knowledge work, top level. 3.1 was my handbook project. So everything in that begins with 31. And then from there it was it was based on an outline. I mean, it was kind of, and I actually, and ironically, I made the outline in Obsidian. So.
But you don't use separators between your numbers, right?
I'm evolving to, I think, having having 4 digits before the dot. I think I'm doing that. Yeah, I think that gets me, and that may change. But as I'm doing these ones, as I'm doing the ones on, actually the ones on my desk right now are from my secular radicals, and that is 1141.11.21.23, and then 1121. So So that is based on, one is history. So it's history, Europe. No, what is it even? No, it's yeah, history. And then 14 is North America. Yeah, so these are North American. Most of these are, some of them. Oh, I guess it's 12. Yeah, so it's history, North America or Europe, and then the next folder, like the secular radicals folder, and that and then the things after the dot are just sort of the sequence of cards. I don't know.
So the digits to the left of the decimal point are categorical,
yeah,
organizational, and the ones to the right are specific notes themselves.
Yeah, I think the things. Yeah, I think I'm gonna use a dot rather than a slash or a dash or something, because I noticed Obsidian doesn't handle slashes very well, and the yeah. So the stuff, all the stuff to the left is kind of folders, and then the stuff to the right is, like the 11, and then if I modified 11, it would be 11A, and then 11A1, or 11B or whatever.
So I'm always concerned about ordering, and I guess that it depends on the way you set up the whole system. Then you worry about, well, what happens when you get to the 99th note? Where does the next one go? And then you order, and then you go to 0.100 or something, but that doesn't order very well. It may not matter, but I always worry about that from the electronic side. If you're keeping an index of the paper system, then ordering may matter.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that everybody talks about and nobody really ever asks the reason. Why did he do this? Why did people do this? Why did librarians do this? And if you dig back into the historical record, and I think it's in Marcus Krajewski's book, Paper Machine, he actually goes back, and most of these numbering systems date back to the 1770s Vienna.
Right.
And within a decade, both the Vienna Library as well as the Viennese government, and they did it because in some sense, their house system and they didn't have street numbers the way the United States has street numbers now. So you'd build a house in the middle of a street, and they had to come up with a system for how does this house get an identifier between two other houses that already have identifiers. And so they built these systems with alternating either numbers, letters, or in some cases, I think the library system, they were using even Roman numerals to insert things. And if you're, I don't know if anybody, Tim at least is a mathematician who probably would understand this, but we have natural numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 as integers, and there are numbers with decimals that all fit in between them. And so you can always extend the length of a decimal out to put any number between any two other numbers. And you can even go one further and even add numbers like e and pi are infinite, and those go in a place or a particular place, so you can do that. So part of these numbering systems is, or at least the benefit I see, and nobody talks about it, when you're doing an analog Zettelkasten in the mode of Luhmann, the fact that you put it behind another idea that's linked to it, that's the first thing you do. You stick one behind the other, and that creates a tacit link between the two, which you don't always get in a digital system.
Right.
In most digital systems, your card starts out totally unlinked to anything.
Right. And
you have to link it. And I have I suspect in practice almost nobody does. So I'm pretty sure there are hundreds of orphaned notes in Obsidian systems because you aren't forced to do that.
Right.
But in an analog system, you put it behind something, and it's only after you figured out where to put it that you then put that number on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the number you're putting on it is a foregone conclusion that it's one more number or one more letter beyond the thing that's in front of it.
Yes.
And so then the question is, what system do you want to have for naming it? Are you using only numbers as a digital thing? Are you interspersing it with letters,
Mm-hmm.
or letters and numbers, or even, if you want to be a purist from, 1778, you can throw in some Roman numerals just to make it really but the issue with that is you may confuse your letter I with the Roman numeral I.
Right, exactly.
You got problems.
I've been in my mind, the A designates, or any letter designates, or any number after a letter, I suppose, too, suggests that's a conversation. Right. So, and again, these are sort of soft definitions in my head, I guess, which I don't know, maybe that's a problem, but maybe it's an advantage that, like the question of, when is something a source and node, and when is it a point node? I think that I like that idea of the conversation, and I like knowing, I like being able to see that, oh, this has got letters, right? So there's something going on here. I'm having a, it's at another stage. Go ahead, Justin.
So if you played around with the Lumen Zettelkasten website, they've got this really great visual representation of the graph with the way the different cards interrelate, which is really a really handy pictorial representation of exactly kind of what you were talking about, Chris, with you can always insert something in between something else, but also keep the previous connection. And I've been kind of half entertaining, I don't find the similar thing in for inserting nodes and adding connections that shows it in this little simple, this is just the local piece you care about in Obsidian or anything else. And it's this is the way to digitally represent that physical card system.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so specialized to only exactly this use, even though it's just it's a generic graph thing, like nodes and edges.
Mm-hmm.
But really focused on attaching nodes to each other. Nobody was bothered to build it for Obsidian. It seems like even the breadcrumbs thing doesn't do that. It's does a bunch of other stuff. And it's I don't want all that other stuff. I just want this part. So maybe I'll make it myself, but I got enough projects, so I don't need to do that. But anyway, that feels missing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, and again, I think it's great that people are making stuff for Obsidian. I mean, everybody, a lot of things are coming, and that's keeping Eleanor really busy reporting on all of the new stuff, and I think that's cool. But I think that in some cases, I think it's an exploration of, what can we do with this software rather than, what do we need, or want for understanding these ideas. Go ahead, Tim.
But just diving back on the house number, if you've ever been to old towns, old cities of Japan, you'll realize that the numbers aren't in sequence.
Mm-hmm.
It's because the houses are all numbered in the sequence in which they get built. So the first house on the street might be halfway down its length, and the second one might be at the other end, at one end, etc. And they just fill in. And aside from the fact they obviously clearly, in terms of European dates, have got that one down pat, i.e. year, month, double-digit day, compared to either the normal European or the normal American. That just seems absolutely crazy. As opposed to somebody's already sat down and worked out all the plot numbers and therefore the house number. But then, of course, if you go back a bit further, in their date terms, they don't give it a year number. They give it, this is the 15th year of a certain shogun or a certain emperor. Mm-hmm. So there's no, there's no continuity. They think the number, as it were, might get to 20, might get to 15, might get to 40, but it starts all over at one again when there's a change of head of state. So there's those things that I always think as being quite funny, and today especially, for instance, it's New Year's Day, but it started at sundown yesterday. Mm-hmm. Unless you're the wrong side by a long way from Mecca, when it started at sunset today, not yesterday. So, and I have to laugh with those people that gave us algebra and alcohol.
I'm having trouble with the roundness of the planet.
Can't actually work out a calendar, and they rely on some sort of 80-year-old imam that looks over a gap to see if the moon's risen in Mecca. Mm-hmm. And of course, Ramadan starts at different times of the year because they're 11, 12 days short compared to the Western calendar as it is now.
Well, because it's lunar, yeah.
Ramadan being the fierce heat can happen in the snows of December. Mm-hmm. So, oxymorons aside, why would you rely on a guy who can't actually see the moon anyway? Because it's his turn to see it, and then you flip and you see the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, and the Emiratis today, and the first thing they get out is their mobile phone with a localized app that says Mecca is that way, not about, but exactly, such that and they even do their prayers when we're on a plane. So they start off at one angle, they finish at a slightly different angle. And the other one that got me on a similar scale was I was dealing with a building site that was very long and thin. And there was an automatic lighting system that came on at the declared sundown time. And the GM would check it every now and then. And he'd come and complain that one end was slightly early or slightly late. And it's like, yes, but you do realise there's a 2-second difference between one end and the other because we're so long and thin.
Wow.
The sheer number of small elements of number that otherwise numerate and intelligent people don't seem to get, like you could have an infinity of infinities, just begs wondering. But it sort of begs the question of what is, of where meaning resides, right? Is it local or is it universal? Yeah. But particularly with the card paper site notes, and particularly if you come back to a subject, so you're not numbering them per project, but you're numbering them for a life of learning, as it were, which you sort of partially mentioned. Sorry. It's you now need to insert what might be a senior note, as an important note, And it turns out that the natural place, because it's got a bit jammed up and well populated, because it's the key part of what you do, then it's going to end up with effectively 4 digits and 3 decimal places, as opposed to it's a whole unit of a number. And of course, there's only 99 of those, unless you improve on that and you go base 16. So numbers and letters straight away.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't get you many, but it gets you some. So, whereas things like Dewey Decimal System, you can always insert a book,
Mm-hmm.
because the Dewey Decimal Number System label number is not unique to that title. There are a whole series of general maths, science, history type books at 510.0.
Right.
Or whatever. So, what's the point of having a reference number that can't expand versus what's the point of having a reference number that is not going to be fixed? Because if we're using it purely as an index to be able to get that note back, it has to be a unique identifier.
Right.
If you're trying to say find it in a mess of stuff because of what it relates to, then it's a relationship number that could be duplicated. Because you pick up all the cards with 510.
Mm-hmm. The problem is I didn't really want to, and this is where I differ from Scott a little bit, because he's not using like full Library of Congress, but he is using like what he says he calls the wiki, for the wiki versions of disciplines. And I didn't want to have, and in the same way that I sort of resist, like Notion and Nick Milo, the whole idea of, having maps of content that are, sort of predetermined, and then, and then thinking about the, and putting things in there. And I didn't want to, I didn't really want to have these things, and I guess partially it was because, this is my box, right? And so I don't care if it, we don't have a hypothesis group for us. We can make a hypothesis group. I was more, what do we got here?
I was going to say, the question is, would we use it all if we had a hypothesis group? But going back to your other point on the categorization, I've been taught and learned a system for creating standards that most of the big standards people in the world kind of adhere to, whether they do it formally or informally. But all these kind of numbering systems or hierarchies or classification systems are interesting. And I think they're useful for people in private settings. Here's a way of thinking of the world that you can use as a crutch or a thing. But the real question or value, I think, in doing any of it, whether you choose a Dewey Decimal or Johnny Decimal or some other something, there are 20 of these things out there easily that are used, and ones that are used by library systems very heavily. But the question of using those starts to become a question of, is your system only for you, or are you going to put it out in public for others to see and use? Mm-hmm. And if it's out in public, then if you have some kind of easy to follow standard for placing something at least within a broad top level area. So let's say in Dewey Decimal 510, the 510 series indicates we're in math. And then subsections of that, smaller areas of specific areas of math. So if I'm taking notes on topology and I can put a number on it that makes it easily identifiable, I'm talking about topology to everyone else, and that then is searchable and linkable to your topology notes and your work on topology, then you've got something, and that would be useful. So, but another way to look at it is, if you look at Luhmann's index, it's way thinner than you would ever imagine. So here's a guy who spent 30 years on systems theory, and he has one index entry under the word systems.
Mm.
And it's literally to, like, you know, card number 8.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, that's fine, because he knows this is where this area starts. And then he starts going through the cards within that section 8 or 8,000,
right,
depending on how you want to look at it. And then he can find what he's looking for because he's built the system and he knows roughly where things are.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't build a system for us to
right.
easily find it. And particularly in his analog system, it's way harder because we don't even have access to the original cards. But in digitizing it the way they are, there's a broader text search that may make those pieces easier. Mm-hmm. So if I want to look at what Luhmann thought about his own Zettelkasten, I can find that section and start reading cards in order, almost as if it were a book, and searching around. I'll have to search around a little, but I don't have the experience he did in making it. So I don't necessarily know where he put it. His index isn't great, and I can only do it because it's digitized and there's digital search that helped me do that. But where you get into, and we're nowhere near that yet, because there's almost nobody has their digital notes online in a searchable format anywhere. Just they don't exist. There's a handful, but you know, probably I've got a handful of specific Zettelkasten examples, but only a tiny handful. And there may be a couple hundred people in total if you look for like digital gardens. But generally, we're not doing that. So there is no easy way to search across or federate. There's a guy in, I'm trying to remember, he's a Google engineer who's got a thing called it's anagora.org. I'll put it in the chat in a second. But he's got people who are keeping their notes in GitHub. If you tell him where your GitHub public store is, he can connect your notes to a marketplace of notes that you can then search and compare and contrast your notes with a group of maybe about 50 other people's.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's fascinating. And that would be a place where having some kind of standard for taxonomy or tagging or numbering systems would be useful. But otherwise, some of these numbering systems are, what's easiest for you? What do you want to use? And then do that.
Yeah. I mean, I almost feel the way you're describing this, Chris, I almost feel like if I am going to explore somebody else's notes, I probably don't want their index. I probably want to kind of journey through them and, you know, and search by keywords and, you know, and sort of follow, and follow links.
Well, if you have
I think that the difficulty, the thing that seems like it would be a difficulty to me would be that, you know, that question of, you know, are people defining their terms in similar ways, right? Is there any type of connection between, you know, when I say, you know, when I use a word, right, organism, you know, does that mean, you know, what you mean, right? And, you know, and
notes is a good example.
Mhm.
You use that word, and there are at least five other words for roughly that concept, although even in each system, they all differ slightly.
Mhm.
But what does that look like? But now let's say if I wanted to get into the history of environmentalism, the first place I would go to look would be your notes, because I know you probably have something in that area. I know who you are. I trust you. I know kind of what your worldview is, so I'll at least have an easy in. And if I had 5 or 6 other people who were doing this practice, I could go much farther, much faster by leveraging other people's public online notes. Or let's say, and then another pattern that it's not common, but it exists and it could be a thing. There's a web standard called web mention that's fairly loosely defined, and it allows me to put a URL on my website that points to your website. And when you read my notes, you could click on it and go see if Dan kept his notes, you could go to see Dan's notes and, oh, okay, this is what's going on. But what web mention does is when you publish that link, it essentially sends a notification to the other website to say, I mentioned you. And if the other website has a receiver to receive this bit of data, then it can give you that notification. So if I mention your notes, suddenly you get a notification. Chris mentioned my notes. I wonder what he said. And then it creates not only a conversation between me and my notes, but now I'm having a third-party conversation with your notes and with you separately. So we now have 4 people having having a conversation. And there's at least one example of this. There are a handful of examples of this, but in the wild, Andy Matuszak's notes don't support sending web mentions, but someone clicked on one of his notes that had a link to one of my notes on my website. And I have an older legacy system that picked that up. So I could then force this web mention thing to happen. But even beyond just the notification, I have a thing on my website that goes back and looks at his page and parses it and pulls data out and places a comment on my website as a comment on my note. And I can reformat it or tinker with it if I like. It's literally our two note systems are then able to have, in some sense, a pseudo-autonomous conversation with notifications back and forth. Now, people are already doing this on Twitter, and I would posit that Twitter is the worst possible place to try and do this.
Yeah.
You can keep all your notes on Twitter, but, that's not a healthy thing to do, I think.
It would seem like, Hypothesis would be another potential place where these things could evolve.
Yeah. And there's a group of people doing that.
That's what that whole I annotate, kind of community thing that they were trying to do seemed to be, about, was having, kind of meta conversations.
Interestingly, I had he happened to be in Altadena 4 blocks away on vacation. But I had a little coffee the other day with Hypothesis's scholar in residence.
Jeremy?
Yeah, Jeremy happened to be like right next door. So I was like, oh, if you're in Altadena, like come on over and let's hang out. So
cool. How's he doing?
He's doing well. He's in fact, he just put a blog post on his website because he's making some massive life changes in the next month and a half.
Wow. Okay.
His better half is got a fellowship at Harvard that starts in a few weeks. So they're about to move to Boston.
Cambridge. Wow. Cool.
And so he's taking a sabbatical year off and working on a second book and 5 other things. They're busy. And
good for him. Yeah, he was. The last time I talked to him, he was really, really deep in this. Trying to force a round square peg into a round hole with the commercialization in learning management systems of hypothesis. And I thought that was not the best use of his talents.
I mean, anytime you get into educational technology, it's a fraught area just to start.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I think that was a problem. I mean, that hypothesis was getting to that point where it was like, okay, now, we've grown, sort of organically, in the free space, now how do we turn this into a business and pay our bills and all of that? So, I can see what might have motivated, that, but.
Well, at least they're doing it in a reasonably ethical.
Yeah.
They're not like hampering their product.
Right.
To force you into an LMS, which
no,
is
absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah. Personally, I think it works a lot better in the wild than it does, and actually also there are so many different LMSs, I think probably, the ones that they were spending the most developer time on, like Canvas and Moodle, it was probably wonderful. We use Brightspace, which is a dinosaur piece of crap, So it wasn't heaven.
I know the space, and even I'm thinking, what is that?
So they were the Open University does. I love Moodle, and I love, actually, I really, really, really like the Moodler. I met him at OE Global, and I expected him to be wanting to talk about, sort of his commercial product and stuff. And he wasn't. He was like all about, what's education going to be like in 25 years. So that was kind of cool. Martin. So yeah, so Hypothesis is trying to do stuff inside of learning management systems. To answer your question, Torin, they're trying to, have it, it works great in the wild, but, what about inside, what about to, sort of to replace the reading and discussion, or augment the reading and discussion capabilities of learning management systems. And I think
mostly it does a couple things. First, if you have single sign-on, let's say you have a Moodle account for your university, you can sign into that. And by doing that, that means you automatically have a Hypothesis account. So you don't need a second account to set up and log in and do the thing. But the other thing it does is it kind of forces a layer of privacy on your classroom discussions, so that you're already kind of in a private, hypothesis space for that particular document that only the people in the class can see. So you don't have crazies like Dan and I in the real world, like coming into the conversation and,
Yeah, and actually, I do create, I use it in a while, but I do create private spaces for my students, because I realize that not everybody wants to, have their stuff out there for eternity. Not everybody's as ready for that yet. And obviously, if you're 18 or 20 years old, maybe you don't want to be, if you're an undergrad and you're trying out new ideas, you don't want to, do something that's going to get you canceled in 10 years when the woke more.
Or if you've got that class of 500 people who are all annotating the same document, and it gets kind of noisy and annoying.
Well, especially the following semester, right? When I assign the same document. Yes.
Yeah. So there's a way you can go in and renumber your PDF document so that you can start from a fresh slate.
Right.
But their LMS integration, I think, automates a lot of that stuff. So you can just say, here's 4 documents for the 8 documents for the 8 sections of my 500 person class.
Right.
And then, so it just those fine points, I think, for that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it bolts onto the, grading systems as well. So there's that as
But if you're grading annotations, like you're doing it wrong, I think.
Well, it's mostly binary. Did you do the things I asked you to do, or didn't you?
I'm still waiting for somebody to grade all my annotations. I passed the 10,000 annotation mark, although I think only about 7 or 8,000 are actually public, which I was kind of surprised that. I thought, oh, I know why. It's because there are a few private groups that I annotate into for various reasons, and those don't get counted, I guess. I was like, I very rarely do private annotations for myself.
Yeah, it's almost like YouTube. They should Hypothesis should send out a little silver plaque, you know, that you can put on your wall. Yeah. So anyway, we are at almost 90 minutes.
Oh, and we were supposed to talk about Dan's book.
Well, we've kind of been talking alongside it. Anybody you want to say anything about my book? Actually, once I got into the group there, once I remembered that there was a hypothesis group, Justin did make some comments in there that I'll check out too.
Yeah, I threw a link. Yeah, I think his were all on the Pressbook site, right?
May have been. I don't know. I think they were on the Pressbook site, but they were in the group. So they weren't public comments on the Pressbook site.
Okay.
Unless I'm missing something. Yeah, and then I can get to, actually, I was able to get to your comments, Chris. Thank you for all of that. That was a lot of detail.
Some of them were in my notes for me, and others, hopefully it's obvious which ones were for me and which ones were for you, or were for other people who might be reading in the margins and seeing your book and little bits and pieces. So
yeah. I think that's going to be, actually, yeah, I'm not sure if people who are reading the book on Pressbooks, they'll have to follow that link. They're not going to see them. Yeah, they're not going to see them attached, right? So what they're going to do is they're going to follow that link, and they're going to get to. And then from where I'm sitting, doesn't let me go right to the place. It says it's a local file, right? So it does. So I get to see the notes, but
which one, mine?
Yeah.
If you want, and I presume it's mostly an OER text, right?
Yeah.
I can take the document I used and throw it into DocDrop, which will save a copy there. And then when you click on those, it will take you to that DocDrop PDF file.
Okay.
And it will exist. It just needs, it's a local file on my computer, but the fingerprint will match. It just needs somebody to host it online as a PDF physically. But my presumption is you may make changes and replace that PDF.
Yes.
Which then it'll have a different fingerprint, and then those will.
So it's a forked copy.
Yeah.
That's an issue with what Delmar does at Davis on LibreText. Go ahead, John.
Just a quick point. I love the cover.
Oh, thank you.
You know, we know your office, your home office, and so it fits that. But it's the metaphor that you talk about, the path through the forest, and the cat is walking through your office. So I just had to say, I just love the cover when I first saw it.
Thank you.
I've loved it too, but I was disappointed that it didn't have the card index in the back. But I presume that photo may have predated the. Did it? Or maybe
it may be back there. I think it's back. It's way in the background. I think
it's right in the center.
Yeah.
Okay, I just need to put my glasses on when I look at the photo.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, it's back there. Yep, it's back there by the armchair. Yeah, it's I mean it's a nice piece of furniture. I like that. I like that piece of furniture. It's getting some stuff in it. It'll be years and years before it's full. But yeah, I'm gonna work on that. I guess I will maybe what I'll do is I'll do an appendix that talks about, as sort of a work in progress, that talks about, the way that I'm numbering these notes. So, because I don't feel like I want to make the text itself about, adopting this particular system. The other question that I had about it was the shift from the note taking to the writing part. Did that seem like it worked? Because because the thing began its life as a writing handbook. So I wanted to show, and I'm going to actually try to use it with we have a class, a little writing section for the survey class. So.
The observant professor will notice that my annotations only go up to chapter 7 or 8. So
okay.
I'm right at that cusp of the switch from the note taking to the creation output. So I'll get to that shortly.
Okay. Well, and then it kind of gets into the weeds a little bit on the on things to watch out for, and in the actual process of writing, word choice and all that kind of stuff. So that may be, that's for, it's kind of weird because it's for different audiences, but hopefully there's a subset of of this bigger group that everybody is talking to who writes about PKM or whatever, that is really more focused on getting stuff out. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
I did tag a few things with the word typo, where there were one or two weird word choices that either didn't make sense to me, or I understood what you were saying, but technically your
yeah, thanks.
Your editor would flag them.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I've been going through, and actually since I first gave you that link, which is the copy that you forked off, that I have been going through and making videos of each of those chapters. And as I read it aloud, I'm catching a bunch of stuff, and I'm like stopping and fixing it and then going on, and so that's my unfortunately I don't have an actual professional editor, but I do, once I've been away from it for a couple of days, and if I go back, and especially if I read it aloud, oftentimes I do catch things like that. And that's all, and that's in Pressbooks, that's all updating live.
I did catch a live edit that you were working on, I think maybe last Saturday.
Oh.
Because when I loaded the page once, it was written by you and your dad. And then when I refreshed the page, suddenly your dad hadn't written it.
Oh yeah, and now he's back. Yeah, I took it off, and the reason that I took it off was because when what I'm using so that I don't have, it's crazy. I was really dreading having to relearn InDesign. So instead of doing that, what I did was I used Pressbooks has a capability of creating a print PDF. So I did that, and I created the print PDF, and I loaded that into Amazon, what used to be CreateSpace. But when I had both of us on there, it went with him as the author in the top of the page, the short title on the right and the author on the left, and it had just SF Alasso as the author on all the pages. And I thought, I don't want to do that. So I took him off, and then I did it again, and it has me on there. And then I put him, and then I kind of went back and put him back on. So yeah.
Yeah. What was weird though was you did it in the 5 minutes that I was creating my bibliographic entry for the
in
book
real time. Yeah.
in real time, and so I'm like,
Sorry about that.
like, wait a second, I just put this in to Zotero with the names, and then I go back and I'm like, because I wanted to check his middle initial.
Mm-hmm.
Because for some reason I thought it was J and not F.
Oh,
and then when I went back, I'm like, where did it go?
Where'd he go? Yeah. Salvatore Francis. Yeah. So he's back. And I actually, in the previous version of it, it was SF and Dan Olaso, but now I've written more of it than he has, so I put myself first. But he'll be okay with that, I think.
Yeah, he'd be proud of his son, I'm sure.
I hope so.
One of my favorite things the writing is very good. I just will say that because I didn't want to write that physically in the margins, but one of the things that struck me, there's in the long history of note-taking and writing, there is a recurring metaphor of bees collecting honey and saving them in a storehouse of knowledge, aka the thesaurus, which is what that originally was in the Greek. And you don't mention that, which was kind of cool well, the history has been broken, so very few people would mention that in rhetoric. Unless you're a rhetorician, you wouldn't mention it anymore. But your two metaphors of cooking and breaking bones and letting things stew was great. And then there was another metaphor from the Calvino that the mining and refining and coming up with the gem at the end. Like, it was nice to see like two new kind of writing and creating metaphors in this kind of space. So.
Yeah. Well, and I try to go back to that, and I don't know if readers will notice it connecting, but in the later chapters, in like chapter 10 or so, 9 or 10, I talk about kind of the architectural metaphor again. And so so the steel goes into the girders of the structure. I like the I really like and I almost felt bad, after reading, and that was a metaphor I was using before the sort of the breaking the bones and stuff, and I didn't realize that until I read, I think it was probably Dawn of Everything, right? That I realized, or maybe it wasn't Dawn of Everything. Maybe it was something that I was reading at the same time, that it was, that we did that because we were scavengers, right? And it was actually Paul Saladino, right? He was talking about the acidity of stomach acids, right? Had to do with the fact that we were not when we started breaking bones to get marrow out, it was because we were the only people who could pick up rocks and break the bones, but the apex predators had already taken all the good stuff, and that's why we had to do it. But I thought that was like too deep in the weeds to make any changes about. But I do like I do like that metaphor of letting things stew.
Although if you do want the bigger audience of rhetoricians, making a nod to the bees. Maybe,
Well, the bees, if I were gonna, and especially if I were gonna mention Beatrice Webb and that, because she sort of, follows that tradition of people, especially, proto-socialists in England, being all about the bees. So I don't know. Yeah, I'll jot that down. The bees.
Yeah, I wrote it in the notes in that section, I think. So
okay, cool.
There's some, if you want to follow it into the links, if you click on, I think I use the word APs.
Oh, okay.
Which actually I've started doing because I've seen so many manuscripts that either have a B drawn in the margin, or they literally wrote the Latin word apes, A-P-E-S, in the margin. And it's done totally without any context whatsoever, but it was such a commonplace thing that the word or a drawing of a bee in a margin meant literally that. It was kind of like the manicule of, I'm pointing at this thing.
Yeah.
Like it was the highlight, or early Renaissance version of drawing an asterisk in the margin. You would reference the bee. Like, I want this thing, I should excerpt it and keep it.
Well, and it was the network, right? Because then later people find it. So it's a network over time of physical objects. That's really cool.
Or it's to push the metaphor even further, it's the bee's dance of me showing you where the good.
Right. This is where the honey. This is where the nectar is.
So you can find the honey for yourself. Make the honey for yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool.
You can click on my tag APs in hypothesis and see all the references that I've made to bees as they relate to rhetoric. If you want to like really go down the rabbit hole.
Okay, I will do that. It does seem like there are several sort of appendix or tangential, in a non-linear kind of multi-dimensional version of this, it would connect to a whole bunch of these things. So that would, that might be a fun thing for me to do as kind of bonus material. Cool. Well, thank you. Any last thoughts? Any things that I blew that I really need to take out?
I wasn't happy with the new names for the note types, but I think you make at least a reasonable case for it.
Well, it was either that or choose somebody's.
Yeah,
and I didn't really want to endorse, permanent notes. So I don't know.
I like the new names. I never found the fleeting notes and that stuff very useful. Evergreen was better, but distinguishing between source notes and point notes, I thought was very useful.
Thank you.
For me.
Thank you. Yeah, I like the image of evergreenness. But then that reminds me that people have done these things with, little trees and bigger trees and that with icons or emojis in Notion or whatever, which again seemed to me to be putting the cart on the wrong side of the horse. Maybe there's a bee thing. Maybe we'll do a bee thing. Put a bee on your.
All right, I put that bee in your bonnet.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, cool. So, and there's the document. It's kind of weird. Yeah, it's gonna be. It will be in. So in this version, my name is the only one on the title page, and on the I guess the left hand pages, and that's why I took him off briefly. But he's back in the Pressbooks PDF and on the
you still aren't coming out until August 6th, so
yeah. That means actually in the next day or so, because on August 6th, my daughter's getting married. That's why I picked that date. But I'll be leaving for Pittsburgh on the 2nd. So so I gotta nail it down.
Productive day that day.
Yeah. So I just thought I'd memorialize that with the publishing date.
You're not going to stick a wedding reference in the book somewhere, like a little hidden Easter egg?
I don't know. I didn't put a dedication in. Maybe I'll dedicate it to her. To my daughter, Sophie. Oh.
That just means you got to write another book for your son. So be careful.
Yeah. Well, I've got, yeah, I've the last, so far I've like dedicated things to the whole family. So yeah, I've got an older daughter, Lucy. I've got Geo. I've got Vivi. So I'll just have to keep writing books.
Or rededicate it back to your dad.
Yeah.
Whose shoulders you
right? Who got the whole thing started? Yeah.
And that also tends to underline I was able to take his notes and extend them and push the conversation forward.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Okay,
but really you're going to dedicate it to your wife, and that's the final word. So we're don't let us influence you too heavily on that one. That's totally your decision.
Yep. Okay, totally my responsibility. Yeah, cool.
Oh, I did mean to check too. Did you go? And you mentioned doing an appendix or something at the end on numbering and indexing type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But did you come back to the numbering thing after chapter 7?
Is that the second time I mentioned it? That might be the last. Yeah.
I don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of seemed like I've got this numbering thing, and here's the thing, and I think you did a reasonable job of mentioning kind of the controversy of numbering, which I think is the worst MacGuffin in the whole space. Like, do we number? Do we not number?
Yeah.
What number system do we use? And too many people get wrapped up in that or lost in that.
Yeah.
And they miss the forest for the trees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Do we want to talk? John says, do we want to talk about the next book? So I think the one that seems to be recurring the most in the conversation is braiding sweetgrass. Although I guess maybe what I could do is I could, as I had promised to do last week, I could, before I take off for Pittsburgh, make a list of all of these books that have been mentioned, and we could sort of weigh in on which ones we would like to read in a longer format. And I'm gonna hold, I think, Tiago aside for maybe a one-off. And then, but I think that Mary Wollstonecraft might be in the running. I mean, and she actually is kind of adjacent to a bunch of things that I'm sort of studying, in the transatlantic radical sort of secularist tradition. So she would be, I'd be into that. But yeah, why don't I do that, and then people can talk about, because I'm also interested in sort of revisiting debt, the first 5,000 years, and and there were a bunch of things mentioned in the last in the notes in the last one. So I'll go back to the chat transcript from last week too, and try to pull all those things out and put them all in a list.
One was the Mary Wollstonecraft. Which particular text?
Vindication.
Earlier,
I think just the vindication of the rights of woman.
Yeah.
Wait, say that again.
Vindication of the rights of woman.
Okay.
You might want to have a look at Newington Green Meeting House, because that was her church, and they have quite a lot of stuff on her.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, that was a bit of a conversation stopper.
We're all taking notes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for taking a look at my little project. And so we will probably, let me just look at a calendar quick before we shut this down. That is, yeah, if we went 1, 2, 3, if we met again on the 27th of August, that would basically give us 3 weeks off.
Yeah.
So
Sooner we've picked a book, we can start pre-reading it,
yes,
particularly in a busy fall.
yes. So yeah, so my project will be before I take off on Tuesday the 2nd. I will post that list, and then I'll still have I'll have internet access and everything while I'm away. So people can be sort of weighing in on that. So maybe we can pick a book next week, and then that'll give us basically the better part of 3 weeks to, or especially if it's books. If we're going to compare a couple.
Then it'll be at least week 3 before I start falling behind a little.
Yes, yeah, and my semester begins on Monday the 22nd, so that'll give me some time to kind of read ahead and make some notes and stuff before.
Yeah. And my second my next academic year starts on the 7th of September.
Oh,
well,
okay.
That's when the website's open, but I'll be starting straight away, even though it starts in October.
Yeah.
So is the Mary Wollstonecraft at least on one of your syllabuses, Torin?
Pardon?
Is the Wollstonecraft on at least one of the syllabi for coursework?
Yeah. In my first module, she was a whole unit.
Okay. Oh, but not reading for the fall.
No.
No, but you've already covered her, so you've got something stored up.
Yeah. So, I can show you the section if you like.
Well, I was going to say, if you want to do the double duty, look at the syllabi for the fall now and recommend those books.
Well, I can't until the website opens.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Have that information yet? I'll definitely take that under advisement.
So they surprise you at the beginning of each semester.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. That's a way to go. All right. Cool. Well, thank you. This was fun.
As always. We're gonna miss you.
I'll get that. I get a list of books out in the next day or so, and then and I'll get that thing published.
And I hope the wedding goes well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm sure it will. It's a big troop movement.
My advice: eat well early in the day before you go, and imbibe any liquor. You don't want to be the dad that ruins the wedding by passing out halfway through because you were too busy to eat, and then you started drinking heavily before the whole thing was done.
That's true, and I do have to make a toast, and then I do have to dance with her. So I don't want to be falling over because I'm not really a dancer.
Yeah, but you've got a lifetime's worth of wedding toast notes that you can shuffle through and.
Embarrassing younger stories.
Yeah, I was wondering how deeply to dig into those. Yeah. So yeah, I've yet to decide. She had her wild phase, but she straightened it all out. So that was good. And that actually probably improves the outcome, really, as long as you.
We're glad the Rose Springer is over, and
as long as you survive the wild phase, I do think that does improve the outcome. Yeah. All right. Thanks very much.
Have a good few weeks.
Thank you. Thanks. You too. Take care.
And you, bye.